All right, welcome to another episode of DD Geopolitics. I'm your host, John, alongside Sarah, of course. Today, we're also joined by Nick Cruse of the Revolutionary Blackout Network. Nick, this is our first time getting to chat, so I'm super excited for this conversation. And then Professor Danny Shah, former professor of Latin American and Caribbean Studies, and Professor Shah is quickly becoming one of our regulars. So, Professor Shah, I'm glad to have you on as well. You guys are both two people that when I think of like an authentic left in the United States, you are two people that come to mind. But kind of, unfortunately, we've seen the left really mirror a lot of what's happening in establishment politics as well. I mean, I think that the left is really increasingly almost being split into two camps. And I was thinking about this when I was talking with Professor Shah a little earlier, actually. And what we have kind of is this established and exclusive constellation of like leftist organizations in liberal cities and elite institutions that have kind of characterized the left for the last decade. And they maintain themselves through this kind of cancellation and endless internal drama, which I know you've both been the victim of at different times. And functionally, they really kind of function as the radical liberal wing of the Democratic Party, right? And to push Democrats left has been one of their main undertakings. Now, you guys kind of represent, I think, both something kind of fundamentally different. You know, this almost canceled left, which, by the way, is growing day by day. I hope I'm part of that as well, and maybe Sarah as well. But we've kind of been pushed. We've been they've tried to maintain us at the fringes of left politics for some time. And these people are also the kind of people who like to popularize socialism and communism in a way that is very exclusive. But we're looking to do really the opposite, I think, bring the conversations about whether it's multipolarity, socialism, and communism, really to the mass of normal people, and use language in a way of relating to the world that they understand. So I think our two guests today really embody what has been treated as the untouchable left, but are certainly in the process of becoming a political force far beyond what these left liberals have offered. So there's a lot to get into today, but I just wanted to start with that. But before we get into some of the more substantive topics that I want to discuss with you all, Nick, I'd love to get your thoughts and reactions to the debate a couple of nights ago. We heard Kamala Harris say that Goldman Sachs said that her plan was better than Trump's, which was just mind-blowing to me as why you would tout that in your presidential debate. She also touted support from George Bush and Dick Cheney, of course. But what'd you make of that? And what does this say to the people who in our left circles think that they can push Kamala to the left?
Embarrassing. First off, man, it's great to be on DD Geopolitics again. My good friend Sarah. And this is the first time I think we've been on the same panel. We actually met in person, John. So it's an honor to be on panel. And we had Danny Shaw. He's a favorite of RBN. So this is guaranteed to be a great conversation. I was listening because I'm a nerd. I was listening to the rally for like 3 minutes that Kamala had, and Kamala was speaking. I just so happened to catch when she was speaking. So let me see what she's saying. You guys want to know the first thing she bragged about? She bragged about the endorsement that she got from Dick Cheney and Liz Cheney. And she's running on that right now. I can't wait to my friends at Hotspot clip that for me. I'm gonna hit my editor up because we need to get that clip at first. And she just started speaking. I called the intro. We bring Kamala Harris, and she like, I'm proud to say I'm endorsed by Dick Cheney. And friends, I need you guys to understand that the Cheneys are extremely transactional political family. They're not endorsing a Democrat or anyone for that matter unless they are able to advance their political interests. And when you look at the agenda that Kamala Harris put out, I immediately went to the foreign policy page, and it was essentially a declaration of never-ending war and conflict. It was Kamala Harris essentially doubling down on Biden administration policy on funding the war in Ukraine. I know you guys are always on top of this because I get a lot of my news on Ukraine from DD Geopolitics as well. But I know you guys know that this year alone, you had around 19,000 Ukrainian soldiers that were charged for abandoning their post. You have an army in Ukraine that is made up of old men and teenagers. The average age is around 44, 45. You had the destruction of the Ukrainian society, economy, the male fighting age population wiped out, and now people are being kidnapped off the street in order to fight for the Banderite regime. And Kamala Harris wants more of that. And she criticized
it's
Trump
insane.
go ahead, John. Go ahead, John.
No, I was just going to say it's crazy. Like what is one of the worst foreign policy disasters, not only in modern times but in American history? The war in Iraq. And you're gonna trot out the literal architect of the war as a validation from the establishment that you're a credible political candidate. It's crazy.
Yeah, and something else you said in the debate, because this is what I was focused on. Obviously, with the red-blue political theater, there's a lot of drama I edit out. I just care about what you're going to do in terms as your power as the executive. And she mentioned when asked about the genocide in Gaza, she immediately pivoted to October 7th, and she repeated the mass rape hoax.
Yeah.
And
let's play that for our audience, actually, because I have that clip teed up. And this is the only long clip I'm going to play, I promise. But I do think that it was so jaw-dropping to me. I can't say it was surprising, but to repeat this establishment propaganda was insane. So our audience should take a look.
Turning now to the Israel-Hamas war and the hostages who are still being held, Americans among them. Vice President Harris, in December, you said, quote, Israel has a right to defend itself, but you added, quote, it matters how, saying international humanitarian law must be respected. Israel must do more to protect innocent civilians. You said that 9 months ago. Now an estimated 40,000 Palestinians are dead. Nearly 100 hostages remain. Just last week, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said there's not a deal in the making. President Biden has not been able to break through the stalemate. How would you do it?
Well, let's understand how we got here. On October 7, Hamas, a terrorist organization, slaughtered 1,200 Israelis. Many of them young people who were simply attending a concert. Women were horribly raped. And so absolutely, I said then, I say now, Israel has a right to defend itself. We would. And how it does so matters. Because it is also true, far too many innocent Palestinians have been killed. Children, mothers. What we know is that this war must end. It must end immediately, and the way it will end is we need a ceasefire deal and we need the hostages out. And so we will continue to work around the clock on that. Work around the clock, also understanding that we must chart a course for a two-state solution. And in that solution, there must be security for the Israeli people and Israel, and in equal measure for the Palestinians. But the one thing I will assure you always, I will always give Israel the ability to defend itself, in particular as it relates to Iran and any threat that Iran and its proxies pose to Israel. But we must have a two-state solution where we can rebuild Gaza, where the Palestinians have security, self-determination, and the dignity they so rightly deserve.
Okay, so there you have it. I mean, history started on October 7th. Israel has a right to defend itself. We hear this narrative over and over again. And then just the contradiction of all of it. Saying that you care for the Palestinians on one hand while continuing to advocate for this kind of fairy tale delusion of the possibility of a two-state solution under these present conditions, and that you're still allowing Israel to use Western weapons and condoning all of this violence. So it's total hypocrisy in my mind. But yeah, Nick, what do you think about that?
Yeah, it's really disgusting, and this is why I've been calling out what I call Western liberal feminism that is used in order to justify imperialism and smear Black and brown men as rapists. So you have Kamala Harris, who's repeating this rape hoax that even the October 7th victim families debunked. The New York Times had to retract one of their articles in shame because they claimed that one of the victims was raped by Hamas, and then the families came out and said New York Times lied to them, and they lied about the story. So they buried it. Do you guys know that's the article that they quote to this day regarding mass rape on October 7th? The Israeli military said there's no evidence of mass rape there is no forensic evidence of mass rape, and it doesn't even make sense on face value that someone would engage in a mass rape campaign, take a rape break in the middle of the most high-stake operation of military operation that we've seen in decades.
Lost your audio.
And what makes it disgusting is that Kamala refuses to say anything about the confirmed mass systemic rape that the Israeli military engages in against the Palestinian population, to the point where there's arguments made by Israeli military officials, not whether they committed the rape, but the fact that they have the right to rape Palestinians. So it's something that was confirmed by the government, confirmed by multiple investigations, but not a word by these Western feminists, because their job is to do the bidding of the empire and promote war and imperialism. But I'll pass it back to you, John. We can get Danny in here as well.
Yeah, Danny, let's get your thoughts. I want to just show just another short clip from the debate to give us some context about how much Kamala Harris really did come out in favor of the establishment and U.S. foreign policy. So here's her thoughts on President Putin.
Putin would be sitting in Kyiv with his eyes on the rest of Europe, starting with Poland. And why don't you tell the 800,000 Polish Americans right here in Pennsylvania how quickly you would give up for the sake of favor and what you think is a friendship with what is known to be a dictator who would eat you for lunch.
Bitch, where the hell is Kyiv?
In Russia.
It's in the CIA. It's where the CIA is located. What is she talking about? The Poles? What Poles? Putin's the one who offered to give the whole thing back to Poland. What the hell is she even talking about?
I mean, it's crazy because you'll hear this, right? And this is clearly the rhetoric of an imperialist, of an establishment pawn. And then, but, you know, and in my mind, Kamala was saying so many things where I'm like, wow, if Trump really had the political tools, he could just punch right at her and call her out for the Ukraine hypocrisy. I tweeted that she should have said that Trump should have said, well, you know, you're calling me a Nazi, saying that I'm egging on Nazis in Charlottesville. Well, aren't you funding Nazis and literal Nazis in Ukraine to the tune of $200 billion? But this is the only thing that Trump could really say. Check this out.
She's a Marxist. Everybody knows she's a Marxist. Her father's a Marxist professor in economics, and he taught her well.
Comrade Kamala.
So Danny, Comrade Kamala. God, man, no, we don't want her anywhere near us. But Danny, I want to get your thoughts on the debate. First of all, did you watch it, and what did you make of that assertion there that Kamala Harris is a Marxist? You know, you could say her foreign policy, I think, is more aggressive than Trump's in some aspects. And how can with this, like with what we just heard from Kamala Harris on Israel and on Russia, how can a so-called leftist in any way justify that Kamala Harris is a harm reduction vote at this point?
Greetings from far Rockaway, New York, to Nick, John, and the Madam Deputy of Internationalism herself, Sarah. Always an honor to learn and build with you all. I watched the debate in a bastion of liberalism in uptown Manhattan, where I'd say 95% of the restaurant and the lounge, whenever Trump spoke, they all booed, and when Kamala spoke, they were bursting in applause, and it was painful. I was there with a few comrades. We definitely grimaced at one another periodically, but we were trying to build with the people and not judge them. Malcolm X has that quote, never judge people for not knowing what maybe 10 years you yourself did not know. So we have to have a lot of patience with our class, with our people. Yeah, I mean, Glenn Ford, the late, great Glenn Ford, the managing editor of Black Agenda Report, always talked about it's not the lesser of two evils that matters. It's who is the more effective of the two evils. And certainly from the perspective of the ruling class that wants a forever war against Russia, a forever war against Venezuela and its sovereignty, a forever war on the Palestinians, Kamala is the more forever war on China. Kamala Harris, the Democrats, are the more effective option. Trump is too clumsy. I mean, when you come out and say that hundreds of millions of people are going to invade from the south to eat people's pets, cats and dogs. I mean, that even goes too far for some of the most extreme racist and anti-immigrant xenophobes. Kamala is more polished. She's a politician's politician. I think shame on all of these liberals as the genocide continues to advance. It's now spread into the West Bank, so all of occupied Palestine is again under the gun. It's been 76 years of unfettered genocide, and for her to get up there and for her to say, after they just sent another $19 billion aid package for more war on Russia, on the Palestinians, on China, and how telling that it's all linked together. And that's the true foreign policy establishment agenda, which dialectically Trump comes into contradiction with. So they don't hate Trump for the reasons that we hate Trump, that he's a racist clown, that he's all of these different things. They hate him because he could be an awkward monkey wrench to their imperial designs.
Yeah, and the other thing that this is linked to is the crackdown on free speech, right? We heard all of these narratives that continue from both candidates that lend themselves to this demonization campaign against anybody who speaks out in support of Russia or of the Palestinian resistance in particular. I mean, there was no room that either of the candidates left for basically dissent on those issues. And I wanted to focus on the crackdown on free speech because both of you have experienced speech suppression yourselves, whether it be from private entities, from leftist spaces, or even the government itself. And we understand that these figures that they trot out, like Kamala Harris and Donald Trump, and the establishment that they represent in their state is really kind of the last bastion of defense for the ruling class. And Danny, I wanted to get your perspective on this because I think that you have a little bit more context, maybe just with a little bit more age, just a little bit. But does it feel like we've kind of entered a new era of McCarthyism now? And how would you kind of situate the crackdown on free speech historically?
Different leftist groups had a forum on this question on Friday. And I found it very interesting that they were so obsessed with Project 2025 and the pending fascism if Trump wins that no one mentioned Scott Ritter. No one mentioned the FBI and my being detained and interrogated. Nobody mentioned England, the United Kingdom, and their crackdown. We were talking about it the other day on George Galloway's mother of all talk shows, what they've done to Richard Medhurst, Sarah Wilkinson, and in Australia, they've done the same thing. So the West is very clearly, we've seen in Berlin, in Germany, they won't even allow peace conferences. If you mention that Palestine has a right to exist, again, to point out the absolute hypocrisy, the dangerous, convincing hypocrisy coming out of the mouth of Kamala Harris. So I just find it peculiar that the left, the liberal left, suffers from this Trump derangement syndrome, warning us about a pending fascism that could begin next January 20th. Well, what about the fascist measures right under our noses? I'm not trying to say that this is full-blown fascism. If it was, the four of us would not even be having this public conversation, but certainly it's an increasing, creeping in fascism, and I wonder why the left chooses to ignore that. I find that to be extremely hypocritical. A lot of these leftist forces really do think that the fortunes of this country will be so better off with a Democratic presidency. But I think it is replete with contradictions because Trump has said from the jump, if he's elected, he's going to end this proxy war on Russia. The liberals will never tell the truth about that war. They just continue to vilify Putin. This is not Putin's war. This is NATO's war. This is the U.S.'s war on Russia since 1990-91, when James Baker, the Secretary of State, promised that NATO would not advance 1 inch eastward, and now NATO is completely surrounded. But somehow it's the 800,000 Polish Americans of Pennsylvania who are the victims because one of the unofficial religions of this country is Russophobia.
Yeah, Nick, I wanted to get your thoughts here because, of course, you run into quite a bit of speech suppression yourself from various angles, but kind of want to get your your experience here, and then hear from you about your perspective on where we can kind of situate this.
I actually have it good. I'm actually lucky because I managed to find a way to work for myself in this capitalist structure. I used to sell cars for years. I was in management in car sales. I was doing quite well. Sacrificed a lot, especially initially to get into citizen journalism. But there's a level of freedom I have that a lot of people are not able to enjoy. On Friday, I'm having Dr. Sabrina on, who was one of the many patriotic Americans standing up against a Zionist entity who was fired and lost her job because of that. And that's how you guys know I'm locked in for life. I'm in it to the end because I'm unhireable, my friends. You guys see the ADL came after me, dropped me by name.
Yeah, that good for you. I was so happy for you.
Yeah,
badge of honor.
Yeah, it was a great day. But can you guys imagine if I was still selling cars for Toyota?
Oh, you're done.
You will have the ADL messaging, the higher ups, the people who invest. They'll be like, is Nick Cruse, does he's represent the value? I'll be gone within a week if I was had the same corporate gig I had before. And this is the simple reality of most Americans, is that this free speech that we have is not real, especially since we live in a capitalist mode of production where the amount of currency, the amount of money you have dictate your status and your value in the society. And then the capitalists, the people who support this imperialist structure, they can get you fired. They can get you fired if you criticize their foreign policy. If you criticize the foreign policy of the Biden administration. And Danny and John, you guys have very legitimate and strong critiques of the left. Many of these people on the left are folding and supporting Kamala Harris and the Biden administration. I mean, they support Kamala, but don't get it twisted. If Biden stayed in, they would still vote for him too. And you had the Biden and Kamala administration that were trying to pursue charges against the Huru 3 Black socialist movement for essentially being critical of Biden foreign policy in Ukraine. Now, they lost at the court level, but what does that say? Because we have an update on that where they've been charged with conspiracy, a giant loss to the fascist Biden administration who want to imprison people for criticizing their foreign policy. You want to know how they reconcile this, John and Danny, the fake left? They simply don't talk about it. They don't talk about it. They don't cover it. They don't acknowledge it. Because if they do, they will have to acknowledge that they are voting for a part. And I actually like how Danny phrased it, how we're not completely fat. I think that's a very accurate way to say it. We are a society with strong fascistic characteristics. I would say that for sure, because you have the merging between the capitalist class, the corporate class, and the government. So now we have full-fledged capitalist retaliation against people who speak out against the ruling class. Last thing I'll say on this, because you guys know I'm a randy motherfucker, but you had many of these Zionist billionaires, Bill Ackman, some of these other people who I don't remember their names, but they said we're gonna put out a blacklist in the list of pro-Palestinian, I call them anti-genocide, but they're framing, they said we're going to make a list of pro-Palestinian protesters and we were going to put them on the blacklist. We will do everything they can to expel them from schools, and then we can't expel them from the school. We're going to make sure they have are unable to get a job. Guys, this is the merging between the capitalist class, the corporate interests, and the government. Once again, they're another strong characteristic of fascism. But I'll pass it back to the panel.
Yeah, I mean, that's like the textbook definition right there of what characterizes fascism at its most elemental. But I think that part of the issue that we're facing here is that the instruments of suppression are different than they were, 40, 50 years ago, where they can basically kind of wipe us from the internet, right? We've run into that problem before. And like you said, Nick, one of the tactics is just to ignore it. And they have the tools at their disposal to kind of wipe issues just out of people's consciousness. And then you have this kind of political rhetoric that's coupled with it. And you heard it in the debate the other night, where Kamala Harris is talking about things like an opportunity economy. Well, like, what does that mean? There's no definition really for what an opportunity economy is.
I mean, there is, but it's not a real term.
Yeah, it's not like an economic
it's like NGO term that they've made up to like make you feel good about the upcoming economy that you might have a chance in.
I mean, exactly. And it kind of just conditions people into this Orwellian doublethink where society can be crumbling around them, but they're told to look at things this way, right? It's an opportunity economy. But anyways, you mentioned
John, I'll just jump in by saying I've been with RT in Russian media. I've never received dissent, but I have done analysis for them for over 10 years now. And the Russians have never told me, well, you should say this and you should say that. But they've allowed me to make what is the core of my belief system, anti-colonial, anti-imperialist points, whether it's in defense of Venezuelan sovereignty, Cuban sovereignty, Nicaraguan sovereignty, all of the things that I can't say on CNN. CNN would never invite Nick or any of this because they're afraid of all of the points that and that's why the Uhuru 3 are in trouble, because the Uhuru 3 dared to question this proxy war on Russia. They want to so thoroughly vilify Russia that we can't even travel to Russia. 1/3 of humanity wakes up every day under U.S. sanctions. But who is the United States government to sanction anybody? They think they're sanctioned by God herself or himself to blockade and punish Zimbabwe and Vietnam and China and anyone, Iran, anyone who tries to chart an independent course in this world. So we hope that more people on the quote unquote left will stand with the Uhuru 3, stand with Scott Ritter, not get caught up in these divisive cancellations and cancel culture. If it's like that classic anti-Nazi quote, first they came for the Jews and then they came for the
they came for the communists. The communists are first. They edited that first line and took the communists out. The communists are the first. First they came for the communists.
Really?
And history is repeating itself. That's why they're coming after us. And that's why liberalism is really the hegemonic ideology of this country. And that's why they're so afraid of a concrete Marxist analysis, which is really a cross to the liberal vampire.
Beautifully put, Danny. As always. But I wanted to go a little bit deeper on the Uhuru 3 because both of you have mentioned that now already. And actually, I want to start off with a great video that I saw Nick put together on Revolutionary Blackout Network. And by the way, if you're not following RBN, make sure to follow it.
Yeah, you're a fuck up if you're not following RBN.
You're messing up because Nick puts out great videos all the time. So let's go ahead and watch.
Joy is the brains of the operation. I don't know what the hell.
Yeah, she's the best. It wouldn't be like the new era. Zoya is the mastermind.
Zoya is the mastermind.
Biden administration is pushing to send 3 black activists to prison for 15 years for actively opposing his wars. The DOJ is accusing the Uhuru 3 of pushing Russia propaganda because they advocate for peace and for global coexistence. If advocating for peace is pushing the propaganda of your enemies, then you are the bad guy. This is the free speech trial of the century. Even if everything the United States is accusing the Uhuru 3 of doing, they have the right to do so under the First Amendment. Sowing discord in American politics is not a crime. You only believe so if you are a fascist. The DOJ claims the Uhuru 3 only believe what they do because it was paid and coerced by the Russian government. What an insult. Black Americans don't need Russia to convince us that the United States is a corrupt, criminal, warmongering country. Take it from me, I don't need Vladimir Putin to convince me that genocide Joe Biden is evil. There is a long history of the DOJ going after black activists and radicals for being too critical of the United States foreign policy. This is exactly why black radicals was warning against Russiagate from day one. It was obvious that Russiagate was created in order to create a fascist crackdown that would impact black Americans first. Notice how the free speech right is completely silent on the free speech trial of the century. The fraudulent free speech right never actually cared about free speech. They just wanted to say racial slurs on social media. And the progressives like Bernie Sanders, AOC, hell, the entirety of the progressive media apparatus refuse to cover this because they don't want the supporters to know that they support an outright fascist political party.
All right, there you go. And I mean, the video says a lot of it. But just to kind of situate this, and this has really been part of the fear mongering around Russian disinformation from the Biden administration. The Uhuru 3 were accused of working as agents of the Russian government in what was called, quote, a multi-year foreign malign influence campaign in the United States that was seeking to influence domestic elections, as Nick mentioned in the video. And the trial is currently happening, so I'd love to get a couple of updates from Nick. But advocates have described these efforts from the Uhuru 3 as a direct continuation of some of the COINTELPRO tactics of previous generations deployed against people like Malcolm X and MLK. And Nick, I know for you in particular, people like Jill Stein have been calling attention to this case. You had an interview with her and spoke alongside her. But I want to get your thoughts, maybe a little bit more detail about this case, like what's really happening here, and maybe some of the
we have an
updates
important update on that. John,
yeah.
Because today they have the ruling where it's a win definitely for the Uhuru movement. They're treating it as a win because all the guilty charges accusing them of being a state agent for Russia were dropped. I still find it problematic because they kept the conspiracy charges, but luckily the conspiracy charges doesn't come with the 15+ year prison sentence that they was originally accused of. And this is just another situation where it's weird, where and I would personally classify the courts in the United States as extreme right wing, but this is another situation where we were saved by the courts from the Biden administration tyranny. Now, there's another story I covered about a year ago where the Supreme Court ruled against the Biden administration wanting to illegally seize the guns of people that the police arrest. This will be a direct violation of the Second Amendment, Fourth Amendment, or not even arrest, but any probable cause. They can take your gun. The Supreme Court ruled that grossly unconstitutional. People who are on the true left, I was raising awareness about this case because it was obviously going to be targeted against Black, poor, and disenfranchised communities. In fact, the case that originally led it to go to the Supreme Court was a Black family who had their guns seized and because they was accused of a crime they didn't commit. So it's weird to say this because you have the Democratic Party that is pushing these hardcore fascistic policies, and then you will have these hardcore conservative justices that just interpreting the Constitution. They're not like activists or anything. They striking down the fascist policies of the Biden administration. And that's what happened with the Uhuru 3. And I said on RBN that if they were found not guilty, I would be surprised. And I am surprised because this had the making of a show trial. I will always admit when I'm incorrect. I was like, man, this is over. This is gonna be a show trial. I'm very pleasantly surprised that they got the intense charges dropped, but they still have the conspiracy charge which is worth noting because they're still criminalizing First Amendment because they're saying they still guilty of committing a conspiracy of inflicting the minds of Americans against United States foreign policy. Now, the good news is that comes with only a maximum of 5 years, which is very unlikely for them to get. So it's good that they had the long sentence drop, but it still actually sends a very chilling precedent. They can even give them a conspiracy charge on this. And that's why the current direction that the establishment is heading to is so dangerous, John.
Yeah, I mean, it's crazy because we were warned all along that it was the conservative justices who are the ideologues. These are the people who are the fascists who are coming to take away your rights. And as you just mentioned, it's Biden's DOJ, and not just the DOJ, but every administrative agency.
You want another example real quick, John? Another example that is something in my state, in Missouri, where we passed a minimum wage and a Medicare expansion through the ballot initiative. And then we have a Republican governor, Mike Pearson, I believe, or whatever. He vetoed and refused to implement the minimum wage law and the Medicare expansion that the voters supported. Remember, deep red, super conservative Missouri consistently vote for progressive policies for the working class. So after Mike Parsons vetoed the Medicare expansion and minimum wage, the right-wing Missouri Supreme Court struck that down, and that will force them to implement it. So it's very weird how the only institution that is preventing tyranny is the right-wing court, not apologizing for me at all. But this has been consistent over the last 2 to 3 years. I know this, but go ahead, John.
Yeah, well, I want to get Professor Shah in on this.
Jenny brought up a really good point, which was it's more about the stress intimidation, the smear, and the terror. And that's really
Yeah.
what it's about. It's just to get you to be like, all right, you know what? I'm just going to stop talking. It's not
Yeah, that's a great comment.
I'll jump in with this. I read this study that 80% of those who vote liberal trust the corporate media, whereas only 20% of those who identify as conservative trust the corporate media. And I think that's very, very telling. In the absolute hypocrisy, I've never heard one liberal in the liberal leftists is they warn us about Project 2025, and not to say that there's not many things to be frightened about and to guard against and to organize against, of course. But what about Project 2024? What about Project Creeping Fascism? What about Project Genocide? What about Project hundreds of billions of dollars for a proxy war against Russia? What about Project NATO expansion? And they don't talk about any of these things. I mean, how can you turn your back on Chairman Omali Yeshitela, the mentor of Dead Prez, M1 and Stickman, who so many people came into conscious political life because of that hip-hop tandem when they dropped that album in 2000, Let's Get Free. So shout out to the chairman, Omali Yeshitela. And like Nick said, it's the trial of the century, but you're never going to hear a word about it from the liberal left because they want to project that Trump represents fascism and somehow Biden and Kamala Harris represent something different. But as George Jackson told us in 1967 in Soledad Brother, fascism is right here. They were already cracking down on free speech. None of these opinions are ever allowed. Look at what Elon Musk is doing with X. I go on. I'm barely on X because they've censored me so thoroughly and shadow banned me and delisted and deboosted and all that stuff. I go on X to do my research or what have you. It's Elon Musk reaching 16 million people with all of his rhetoric in favor of Trump. So truly, this is the corporate duopoly dominating what's new, dominating politics and elections again.
And as for 2025, Project 2025, you referenced that. No serious revolutionary movement is a serious revolutionary movement if they're saying that your project is just for the next year, right? Like, in what world are they imagining that they're going to remove this fascist establishment, duopoly, financial oligarchy by 2025? It's just not going to happen. What they're basically doing is just kind of clouding it and revolutionary rhetoric, but it's just another case of this reactionary illusion. But no, I think that the points are well taken. That was a crazy statistic, Danny. I didn't actually know that, but that is very jarring to know that so many liberals and Democrats trust the mainstream media.
Yeah, they support the CIA and FBI more too, which is wild.
I mean, it's crazy, but I do think that it seems like it shifts from election cycle to election cycle, right? Depending on who's in power, then there might be more of a level of mistrust for the FBI, for example. But
I'll jump in there quick. It was unprecedented in 2016 and 2020 that the FBI and the CIA took out massive ads in the New York Times to endorse the other candidate that wasn't Trump. So if Kamala Harris is the FBI candidate, if Kamala Harris is the CIA candidate, that should certainly raise some critical eyebrows in the liberal left.
Yeah, well, I wanted to go to kind of circle back to a topic that the establishment is unified on, which is the war on Palestine, the unfolding genocide going on in Gaza. Because for all the talk of Russian disinformation, I mean, there's been no one from the political establishment to talk to the fact that the Israel and Zionist lobby has unprecedented influence, working with the mainstream media, funding our politicians' campaigns, putting out all sorts of disinformation. But I think it's kind of interesting the way that the candidates and the domestic political situation in the United States is shaped up. We saw both Kamala Harris and Donald Trump make extremely pro-Israel statements, one of which I already played. And I know that both of you have spent a good amount of time covering the influence of the Zionist lobby in the United States. And I'm kind of interested to get your thoughts about what their strategy is ahead of these presidential elections. Is it just to try to both outdo one another on who can be more pro-Israel. That's what it seems like we're seeing.
Yeah, that's why in hindsight, knowing about AIPAC, in hindsight, the Bernie Sanders project and the Justice Democrat project of trying to take over the Democrat Party was always incoherent, especially considering that AIPAC existed. Now they bragged about rigging 90 out of the 90 of the Democratic Party primaries, and this is just the capitalist infiltration of our democracy. So there's this false premise that a lot of people have. They believe that American capitalism is the height of democracy. Meanwhile, if you look at Stalinism, any form of communism, Marxist Leninism, they view that as anti-democratic, where my interpretation is they are the most democratic processes, because you have the dictatorship of the proletariat, the will of the people being fully enforced. Meanwhile, in the capitalist class, you can predict who's going to win our elections at around a 98 to 99% rate based on who raises the most money. And when you look at the money, obviously AIPAC is the biggest target that everyone look at, but Sheldon Adelson is not AIPAC. You know what I mean? George Soros spent $128 million on the midterms, breaking all records. But if you bring this up, you bring out the fact that all these Zionists are bankrolling and destroying our supposed democratic institutions. You have organizations like the ADL that will call you anti-Semitic for saying that. And you have Kamala Harris, who married her AIPAC handler husband because he in the White House right now advocating for censoring Americans for quote-unquote anti-Semitism, where he conflates to anti-Zionism. So we had to be clear to the working class that no matter who wins, we will still have this Zionist entity that will make out as the winner, the same way that BlackRock will be the winner no matter what. The same way that Goldman Sachs will win no matter what. Goldman Sachs, BlackRock, and the Zionist entity is undefeated in elections in my lifetime. I'll pass it back to John in the panel.
Yeah, I mean, I think. Oh, go ahead, Professor Shah. Jump in.
I think it's important to go back to Marxism 101 and the economic base and what flows from the economic needs and desires of the U.S. ruling class. For 76 long genocidal years, they have used this massive military base in the Middle East that some people call Israel, and they have shrouded it with this whole ideology of freedom and safety for the Jewish people, and it has nothing to do with that. But the American people have been so thoroughly bamboozled by the mainstream corporate media, by the Zionist lobby. And it's just important as this genocide now expands into the West Bank. So all of occupied Palestine right now is under the gun. How hypocritical that the United Nations can go in to deliver polio vaccines when there's thousands of humanitarian aid trucks on the border, on the Rafah border in Egypt. And of course, Al-Sisi, this puppet dictator in Egypt, and the king in Jordan, fundamentally in contradiction with these populations who want to fight, but they can get the polio vaccine in to children that what chance do they have not to be starved to death and dehydrated? And of course, Kamala Harris and Trump are never going to mention this. They genuflect, not just before Zionism, but before the needs of U.S. militarism in all of the West. Shame on Germany, shame on England, shame on France, who use Israel to dump all of their weapons to make massive profits off of the genocided blood of the Palestinian people. And Trump now uses the word Palestinian as an insult. I mean, what type of world do we live in where he called Biden a Palestinian? They're trying to convert Palestinian into this euphemism, I don't know, for some type of scandalous or weak human being. It's the total opposite. Who has been more of the David to their capitalist, genocidal, Zionist Goliath than the Palestinian people? The Palestinian people are our heroes. The Palestinian people are our sisters and brothers. And we're going to keep doing everything we can to raise consciousness. And having just returned from Southeast Asia, from Europe, every Saturday there's demonstrations of millions and millions, and I'm not exaggerating, to see 1 million people march through downtown London in front of Parliament, demanding peace, demanding that the Palestinians can live, can survive. And then when you go to Indonesia and East Timor and Malaysia and Singapore, overwhelmingly, the world's 8.0 billion human beings stand with the Palestinian people. It's the Western ruling classes who are fully complicit and behind this Holocaust of human life, who have duped our populations here in the West.
In my mind, this, like, the way they're portraying Palestine is also kind of crystallized like the domestic U.S. politics in my mind, because obviously we heard them both do everything that they could to get in the good graces of Israel, but we also know that Zionism, and Sarah knows this very acutely, it's only one element, right, of the political establishment. It's one thing that characterizes them among several others. So, you know, kind of with that in mind, it's like there's something more that's happening here, and I think that what we're really seeing is this concerted effort to push the American population and American consciousness away from a left-wing populism, right? This seems like it's kind of the key, the crux of what the ruling class is attempting to do, because when Donald Trump, you know, says to Kamala, well, you're basically like, you're not a conservative, like, show me that you support Israel, and Kamala, he tells her to jump, and she says, how high? Basically, I can go higher than you in supporting the, quote, enemies of the United States empire. So I want to kind of see what you guys make of that, and how.
Yeah, I was discussing this on the show on RB not too long ago in response to Kamala's first interview, and we've seen more of it with the debate, and she had a radio interview I didn't see much of. In my interpretation of those was how dangerous Kamala Harris is. Like, she's like the worst kind of person to give power, because you can tell she has no ideology about her. Like, she's in pure pursuit of power, which is why obviously we all roll our eyes whenever MAGA calls her a communist or Marxist. They make the argument that she flipped her position from Medicare for All, but everyone forgets that she changed on those positions in the first place in order to undercut Bernie. She never believed in it, and then once she realized that didn't work and her numbers went in the toilet, she then pivoted to the center again, where she dropped them. And what does this show you? This show you this is someone who is completely able to be bended. Bend by who? Bend by the true agents of power. We don't have a president right now. We have Joe Biden, who is no way anyone truly believes that he's actually running stuff, because he's deficient. He's demented, and that's not an insult. That's just reality. Everyone knows that. Kamala's on the campaign trail 24/7. So the question is, who's running the country? The country is being ran by the shadow, true deep state that we talk about, the unelected government official, intelligence officials. And when Kamala Harris take office, do you think she will have a grand vision based on ideology that she had for years and decades? Absolutely not. She's the worst politician. She's malleable. She will do whatever it takes to get power, which makes her the most dangerous, because she's more than happy to hire BlackRock economic advisors who have an economic interest in rebuilding Ukraine. She's more than happy to have the support of Palantir, who creates AI that killed 80% of civilian targets in Gaza and in the Middle East, who support her. And the same with the Cheney. She want to do whatever it takes to have power, and that will make her the most dangerous. But go ahead, John.
Didn't she shout out John McCain? Or somebody shout out John McCain at the debate? What are we talking about John McCain at the debate for? I can't remember, but I think it was her talking about how much she loved.
She's trying to pander to the anti-Trump Republican vote. Nick covered how she invoked the support from Liz Cheney, Dick Cheney. These are not things to brag about. How are you bragging about having the worst representations of greed, of capitalist greed, of corporatocracy? But liberalism, in its essence, is the most superficial of ideologies. Liberals are so caught up that Kamala Harris came out and went right up to Trump and shook his hand. I'm Kamala Harris. And they think that's so bold.
Yeah.
And they get caught up in her dance moves and in her smile.
Slay, queen. Kamala is Brad.
All the while, capitalism is able to do what it does and churn out more genocide and more war and more militarism. Why didn't the ruling class, the true ruling class, the liberal ruling class, why didn't they pivot to her months and months ago? Why would they put up, Weekend at Bernie's half dead zombie Joe Biden, who doesn't even know where he is? I mean, why would they embarrass themselves? All they could have put, Nick made great points about Western liberal feminism and how caught up they get in the superficial. I'm just surprised the ruling class waited so long. She seems to be like the perfect candidate, going back to how John started us off with the new tentacles of liberalism being cancel culture and identity politics and LGBTQ ideology elevated over class politics. I mean, Kamala Harris is the liberal wet dream. I'm surprised they waited so long.
Yeah, I have another thought because I was thinking about this, listening to you guys talk about the Cheney endorsement, and I just had a thought just on top of my head right now. They're not, and bear with me here, I'm working this out live time. I don't even think they're necessarily touting the endorsement of Dick Cheney and Liz Cheney because they think it will be effective. Because, like you said, they're trying to win a never Trump Republican. You have more Democrats that didn't vote for Hillary Clinton and Joe Biden than never Trump Republicans that exist. Never Trump Republicans don't exist. It's a media creation. Do you guys understand? The percentage of Republicans who voted against Trump is lower than the amount of Democrats who voted again for Hillary Clinton and Joe Biden. So what I really think they're doing is I think this is a psyop designed to normalize right-wing neocon foreign policy. So they're not actually trying to convince young people that Dick Cheney is good. It's all about normalizing that ideology. Does that make sense, or am I reading too much into it? That's why I think it's all about shifting the Overton window to the right, because I don't even think they think it's successful to run on Dick Cheney. That's a random thought I had. Go ahead, John.
No, I think you're right on there. But the other piece of that is that it's Trump himself who's kind of assuaging these people on the so-called left who are, thinking about voting for Harris. Like for example, when he calls her a communist or says that her dad is a Marxist, it actually, I think, cools off the level of discontent and protest that you might otherwise see against the Harris campaign. You probably saw this at the DNC Absolutely. Too. Great point. And I was like, Trump, literally the day before the DNC, I think it was the day before, that he tweeted that picture of Kamala Harris and the communist logo. I'm like, that actually serves to undermine probably those protests at the DNC. So it almost feels like there is this, way that the campaigns are playing off each other and working together.
Yeah, that's the dance. Dan, I'll pass it right to you. But that's on RB, and we talk about this all the time, how the Republicans give gifts to the Democrats by pretending that they're far left. It helped whitewash the record. They play the dance like if you watch pro wrestling, you got the heel in the face. That's the kind of coordinated dance between two-party duopoly. But go ahead, Danny. I know you want to chime in, brother. Go ahead.
Yeah, well, we can laugh, of course, and we do when Trump is like, you're a Marxist and Biden's a Marxist and you all are communists. But so many people across this country are eating up that rhetoric because they don't know the unofficial religion of this country is anti-communism. So they would never have real exposure to like the four of us and the ideas that we represent, and we fight for people's dignity and more jobs. And why spend hundreds of billions of dollars on war against Russia, war against China, war against Venezuela? They never did anything to us. Take all that money, invested in Kansas City, invested in Cleveland, invested in Youngstown, on, invested here in Far Rockaway, where I am, another survivor and victim of post-industrialization, of deindustrialization. And it is important, though, to point out Kamala Harris's father is indeed, there's so much obfuscation that it gets confusing. He is indeed a Marxist professor from the University of West Indies. He's a Jamaican Marxist. He disowned his daughter decades ago because of her neoliberal capitalist ideology. They have not been in contact for decades. And when different activists and scholars have tried to put this out there and even published books, Jimmy Dore did a whole segment on this, they've been banned and those books have been taken offline. So it's amazing how afraid they are that the truth about Kamala Harris's father down at the University of West Indies, he's a real Marxist intellect, and they're afraid that story could get out.
Yeah, unfortunately, Marxism actually doesn't just pass down by blood. At least we. That's what we're gonna go with. That's what we're gonna say. But all right, guys.
Don't say that. Don't even give them ideas because they'll be like, it's just like Judaism, but this one's passed down the patrilineal line. And if you have any communism in your blood ever, you're automatically a communist. Check the early life section on Wikipedia.
There you go. There you go. All right. Well,
guys, love you guys, and I'll see you later.
Bye, everybody. And Nick and Danny, can you guys? Nick, can you tell us where to find you and what you have coming up with RBM before you jump off?
Tomorrow I'll be live with Dr. Sabrina. Sabby and JB is live right now. They just started, so that's perfect timing. They got Chris Moss, who they will be talking to. And unfortunately, I got had a hard out right now because I am honored to be the keynote speaker for the 80th birthday of Leonard Peltier, and they're raising awareness about political prisoners. We're going to be discussing the Uhuru 3 and other people who are victims of political retaliation. So that's what I'm heading to right now. So it's always good to be in solidarity with you, John, Danny, and everyone in the DD Geopolitics community. Have a good one, fam.
Thanks.
Shout out to Mumia and Leonard Peltier, all the prisoners of capitalism and empire. There's so many political prisoners in the country we never hear about. Everyone check out the American Communist Party. We're growing, we're building, we're meeting with everyday working class people, seeing what role we can play, pushing back against Tweedledee and Tweedledum, a system where neither candidate represents us. And with my whole, account on X, if anyone's out there, that can help me, because I was putting out a lot of information on Haiti, and now we really have no way of putting out that information because I've been so thoroughly banned and censored from X at Prof. Danny Shaw since I was doxxed and fired on October 20th of last year, and then this past Easter week I was fired. So hopefully somebody out there can help advocate, because Elon Musk has this whole thing about he represents freedom of speech. Well, I've never done anything that is anti any human beings. My beef is with genocide, and that's precisely why they have censored me now, coming up on a year. But it's important to get out all this information, so any support's always in solidarity is always appreciated.
All right, well, thank you so much, Professor Shah, and I'll speak to you soon. But thanks, everybody. It's another great show, and I'll see you next time.